Christian, after the fearsome fight with Apollyon, when he might have died of his wounds, had found healing under the tree of life. But it was only a brief respite. For as he continued on his journey, he now had to enter the darkest valley he had yet encountered, a very lonely place where there was no water. No one ever lived there, and its silence was the silence of the grave. Here, Christian was to be more sternly tested than even in his fight with Apollyon. It all started when two men suddenly ran out from behind some trees, shouting, "Back! Go back!" "Why? What's the matter?" asked Christian. "Matter?" said they. "Why, the valley itself. It's as black as pitch down there, and the only sound is the howling of the damned, who, having entered there, have never been able to find their way out. In a word, it's every whit dreadful and utterly without order. For, we'd have you know, this is none other than the valley of the shadow of death." "But," said Christian, "there is no other way to the celestial city." "It's not the way we're going," they said. "Quick, go on! On! And they ran on, past Christian, waving their arms in terror. Christian, notwithstanding, went forward, sword in hand, feeling his way step by step, for the path was exceedingly narrow. On the right, there lay a very deep ditch, into which many had fallen in all ages and perished miserably. On the left, there lay a marsh so dangerous that even a good man, if he was sucked in, was never seen again, for he could find no bottom for his foot to stand on. And it was all so dark that when Christian tried to avoid the marsh, he almost fell headlong into the ditch, and he never knew whether his next step might not be his last. Then he saw ahead of him the light of a fire burning, and for a moment, as one does in dreams, he thought the worst was over. Some light to see by! This is better! But he was utterly mistaken. For what he had seen was the very mouth of hell itself, out of which were belching clouds of evil-smelling smoke, which added to the darkness all around. And the air was full of doleful voices, and the rush of wings, apparitions against which his trusty sword, with which he had put to flight Apollyon, was of no avail, for they cared not for his sword. And sometimes they brushed against him with such force that he feared they would push him off the path, and he would drop into the depth of hell and be lost forever. These rushings to and fro were heard by him for several miles together, till he could go no further and dearly wanted to go back. But then he thought, by now, I may be halfway through the valley, and the danger of going back may be as great as the danger of going forward. So he resolved to go on, and he shouted into the darkness with a vehement voice, "I will walk in the strength of the Lord God." And for a while, silence fell about him once again. But not for long. For now, one of the wicked ones came up behind him and started whispering many base suggestions in his ear. "Why don't you come?" And Christian became so confused, he thought it was his own voice. And he neither knew who he was or where he was. And this grieved poor Christian more than anything he had met with before. And he might easily have fallen on his sword and put an end to his misery. At that moment, he thought he heard the voice of a man going before him, saying, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Immediately, Christian took courage, and for 3 reasons. 1, he gathered from this that there were others who feared God in the valley beside himself. 2, he perceived that God was with them, and if with them, why not with him? 3, he hoped to overtake them and have their company. Moreover, day was dawning, and he could look back. And by the light of day, he saw those hobgoblins and dragons of the pit which had brushed against him in the dark, but all afar off, for after daybreak they dare not come near. The sunrise brought another benefit for Christian, for though the first part of the valley was dangerous enough, the second part was, if possible, even more so. From the hillock where he stood, he could see the path ahead, that it was cunningly set with pitfalls, traps, and secret nets, so that, had it been dark, he couldn't have escaped death, even if he'd had 1,000 lives. As it was, he once became entangled in a net, and only his trusty sword could free him. And twice a man-trap, snapping shut beneath him, almost caught his leg. And time again, he nearly fell to his destruction as the ground crumbled under him. Then, just when he believed he was out of the valley, he came across a grisly sight indeed. A pile of skulls and mangled bones lying outside a cave. Even as he stopped to peer within, a sudden hand came out at him. It tried to seize him by the throat. He only just leapt back in time. It seems that once 2 giants had lived there, both with a taste for pilgrims' blood, but one had now been dead for many years. The other, whose name was Pagan, though he was still alive, was, by reason of his age, grown too stiff in his joints to venture far. He could only bite his nails in frustration at the pilgrims passing by. So Christian came to no more harm and hurried on his way. Then, on the path ahead of him, he saw a man running as if for his life. He recognized him as Faithful, his friend and neighbour, the same whom the porter at the palace had informed him of. "Oh there!" he shouted. "Wait till I catch you up!" But Faithful only ran the faster, crying, "There's an avenger at my heels! I'm running for my life!" He was still half crazy with fear after passing through the valley. In the end, Christian was able to reassure him, and soon they were walking most lovingly together, each telling the other his adventures on the way. So they made the hours pass easily, which might otherwise have been tedious. Faithful, it seemed, had escaped the slough, but met a wench whose name was Wanton, who was nearly his undoing. Apollyon, though, he didn't have to fight. "How long, dear friend, did you stay in the City of Destruction?" Christian asked him, "before you set off after me?" "Till I could bear it no longer," Faithful said, "for the townsfolk were all mocking you for seeking to escape." Then, of a sudden, Faithful spied a man on the road ahead. "Who's that?" he cried, once more consumed with fear. But Christian said, "It's my good friend, Evangelist." And so it was. Evangelist had come, as was his wont, to warn them yet again. Don't think you're out of gunshot of the devil. For, as the Gospel says, my sons, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to pass through many tribulations. He then pointed into the distance. You will soon come to a town, he said. You can see it there, before you. It is the town of Vanity. And in that town you will have enemies. And then he added, looking fixedly upon them both, Therefore, commit your souls to God, and quit yourselves like men, for one of you will die a painful death. With that, Evangelist suddenly departed, and Faithful and Christian were left wondering, which of us two did he mean? There was nothing for it but to go forward and find out.